The United Nations has been accused of a series of failures in the lead-up to the current crisis in Myanmar. The UN Secretary-General acknowledged today that the crisis has produced the world's fastest developing refugee emergency. More than 500,000 Rohingyas have now fled to neighbouring Bangladesh. Around 90% of the population of Myanmar is Buddhist, but 1 million Rohingya Muslims who have been denied citizenship live in Rakhine State. The latest violence broke out in August when Rohingya militants launched attacks on Burmese security forces. Our correspondent Jonah Fisher has seen internal UN documents outlining concerns about the handling of the Rohingya conflict, and he has this special report.
In the month since Rohingya Muslims first began fleeing into Bangladesh, the United Nations has been at the forefront of the response, delivering aid and making robust statements condemning the Burmese authorities.
The situation remains, or seems, a textbook example of ethnic cleansing.
But could and should the UN have done more before the killing and burning started?
Really disturbing to think that some of this could possibly have been prevented.
Caroline van den Abele is a lawyer and aid worker, and between 2013 and 2015 she ran the office of the top United Nations official in Myanmar. This is her, Renata Dessalien, a Canadian. It was a stressful time. Miss van den Abele says her boss was so afraid of upsetting the Burmese government that any suggestion that they stand up for the Rohingyas' human rights was off limits, even in internal meetings.
Well, you could do it, but it had consequences, and it had negative consequences. It had consequences that you were maybe no longer invited to meetings, or it had consequences that your travel authorizations were not cleared. An atmosphere was created that talking about these issues was simply not done.
Ms van den Abele says she repeatedly warned her boss about the possibility of Rohingya ethnic cleansing. But she was labelled an alarmist and a troublemaker and frozen out of her job.
The UN acted the way it did in very simple terms because it was preferring to keep its good relations with the government over protecting the Rohingyas.
Her comments have been confirmed off the record by other senior UN staff. Thomas Quintana is more used to speaking out. This is him when he was for 6 years the UN's Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Myanmar.
Both Muslim and Buddhist.
He told me via Skype from Argentina that Mr. Dessalien tried to stop him covering Rohingya issues when he visited and asked him not to go to northern Rakhine State.
So I asked why, and there was no answer in this respect. It was just a stance trying to not to bring troubles with the authorities, basically.
The UN is aware that it does have a problem. This report, commissioned by the UN 2 years ago and leaked to the BBC, says the UN focused too heavily on the oversimplified hope that development investment itself will reduce tensions. A memo prepared earlier this year for the new Secretary-General called the UN in Myanmar glaringly dysfunctional. Could the United Nations have stopped this Burmese army offensive? The answer is almost certainly no. But things just might have been different if there had been a coherent strategy over the last few years demanding that the Rohingyas' basic rights be respected and making aid to other communities conditional on the Rohingyas being treated better. After those damaging internal reports, the UN announced in June that Ms Dessalien would leave her job. But Myanmar seems to quite like her and has blocked her replacement. So she's still here.
She is fair and she is not biased. So whoever is biased towards the Rohingya won't like her.
Ms Dessalien declined to be interviewed for this piece, but in a statement her office said, "We strongly disagree with the accusations that the resident coordinator prevented internal discussions," and stressed that she had the backing of the UN Secretary-General. In the last month, 500,000 Rohingya have fled Myanmar into Bangladesh. Their tales of atrocities and abuse a reminder of the warnings that went unheard.
Hard to say which action would have been able to prevent this. But what I know for sure is that the way it was done was never going to prevent it.
Why not?
The way it was done simply was ignoring the issue.
Jonah Fisher, BBC News, Yangon.